Jennifer. 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 Jennifer.
While its gameplay is bare bones, its combat sluggish, and its exploration mundane, Rule of the Rose has one of the strongest narratives in any horror title or games in general. A narrative so strong that despite the shortcomings of its gameplay, it is worth checking out for any horror fan, or for those looking to see what a strong execution of a narrative looks like in a game. It's right up there with Silent Hill 2. It's a dark, depressing look at the suffering and cruelty of children, but also one of the most genuinely moving. While never a huge seller and was surrounded by controversy, its reputation has grown over the years, and for good reason. Let's take a look at why.
I can't get along with girls like her. It's into the onion bag for her.
Rule of Rose was developed by Japanese developer Punchline. They had just one title prior to Rule of Rose, that being Tulip for the PlayStation 2. A game in which you improve your reputation around town as a newcomer and then kiss them. Rule of Rose would be a much more different, darker title. And this was a very controversial title at release. Not in Japan, it released in January 2006. It's when it made its way out west for release later in the year that the controversy arose. From this controversy, Sony would wash its hands clean of publishing the title in the West, which is picked up by 505 Games for Europe. The mayor of Rome called for a ban on the title, saying this game must not enter Italian homes. It was banned from sale in the UK. From doing some research, most countries in Europe seem to ban it from release. Atlas would publish the title for its North American release. One politician said Rule of Rose contained obscene cruelty and brutality to children. While the game is extremely dark, what politicians and the media portrayed the game as was greatly exaggerated. Remember, this was the mid-2000s when politicians and the media had to really hate on for violence in video games. I've covered this in the past in my videos on the Manhunt series by Rockstar, which were under heavy fire during this time frame. Rule of Rose didn't do huge sales numbers, and like another PS2 survival horror title I've covered in the past, Haunting Ground, you have to pay a fair chunk of change for a physical copy. To note, I am playing this on an emulator. Onion Games, a Japanese-based indie developer, have expressed interest in making a remaster of Rule of Rose back in 2021. They have done a few remasters, and some of their staff did work on Rule of Rose. Whether this will come to light remains to be seen. To also note, with me using an emulator here, I am playing this upscaled with a widescreen patch. The game looks like a later era PS2 title. In-game graphics look just fine, though there's nothing much to write home about there. It's the FMVs that are quite noteworthy. They're well directed, acted out, with plenty of details and love put into them. They were done by Shirogumi, who are a Japanese video effects company that are frequently outsourced for developing cutscenes. I didn't realize how much work they've done in the past in video games. On the soundtrack front, it's very minimal and memorable soundtrack. Minimal in the sense that it's just piano and a handful of stringed instruments. You know, if so many games use these large orchestras and you can't remember any of the soundtrack, that's not the case here.
She wanted to find a friend, but she was too okay. Once upon a time, there was a... Go!
It's very soothing, but also can be uneasy and tense at times, and is a perfect fit for what the game is going for. The creaking sounds of the airship add a haunting, surreal ambience to our adventures. Rule of Rose plays like most survival horror titles from this era, although it's fairly minimal and not the game's strong point. Some sections will allow you to switch camera angles with the shoulder buttons. As it's not tank controls, some of the camera cuts can lead to that awkward issue of reorienting the joystick. One tweak that's included with the widescreen patch is the running speed of Jennifer being slightly sped up, which I appreciate as I felt the standard running speed is a bit slow. There's not a whole lot going on here gameplay wise, so I did enable it after a period of time. Our protagonist Jennifer has this timid, scared nature to her, which is expressed through her neutral stance. She rarely talks outside of gameplay. Fun fact, this is the same voice actress as Ciri from Witcher 3.
It wasn't me, honest.
Avalok, he prepared some special ointments for me. But that was before the curse gripped him. Wonder where he is now.
A bucket night will serve as our save points and for hints if we need them. Although it's not like you're ever really at a loss for what you need to do unless it's been a while since you've last played. There's a trash bin where we could store our items. We do have a limited inventory, but somewhat odd in how it works. You could just drop items on the ground and it'll just go back to the trash bin for storage. There's no indication of when you don't need an item anymore, so you can end up with these stuffed trash cans holding onto random doodads or a full inventory. I'm not sure why they didn't have the "you don't need this item anymore" discard option. I'm a fan of limited inventories when done right, but that's not the case here. There wasn't that much thought put into it. Back in my video on Haunting Ground, I mentioned how Huey was my favorite video game dog, and I did make mention of Brown there, which comments pointed out. Hindsight, I don't know why I didn't mention Brown from Rule of Rose in that list. While Huey serves more as a fairly sophisticated gameplay device for Haunting Ground, Brown here serves more on the narrative end. Although he does play a large part of the gameplay design here, it's just that Rule of Rose is fairly minimal with its gameplay, Brown included on that front. The strength of the game doesn't come from its gameplay, but its narrative instead. I hate how we found him strung up to begin with, very gratifying to free him. Who would do such a thing? Well, the further we dig into the world of Rule of Rose, we find out who can be that cruel. The game is structured as so. We'll need to find an item, so we give Brown something to smell. Off we'll go and we follow him. This will usually lead us to another item, repeat the process until we find what we need. We can also do this for non-key items like health items. Rule of Rose is split by chapters. Our paths are very linear here. Despite the airship having a number of areas, doors will be locked or will be kept out by kids. This varies by chapter. There is no "this door is locked" mention. Instead, it takes a moment for Jennifer to try to open the door, only to find it's locked. Our map doesn't get updated, so more or less you'll just have to follow Brown, which more or less makes him a waypoint marker of where we need to go. It's not the most thrilling of gameplay. He's not a sophisticated AI. There is no training required like Huey in Haunting Ground, although you can pet Brown. I would love to see the airship structured like the classic survival horror title. Perhaps each chapter will find a key that opens up a new path, but that's not the case here. Puzzles are always a nice way to add some flavor to these kind of titles. Beyond putting together what's happening in the narrative, there's really only one puzzle here in Rule of Rose. It's simply finding birds on the wall and adding up the numbers. Puzzles could have been greatly appreciated here to make the game more enjoyable. Adding to the mundane nature of Rule of Rose's gameplay is the combat. Now, combat in these type of titles is usually minimal and clunky, but here it's really clunky. Hit detection can be very iffy. Jennifer being knocked down can take an eternity for her to get back up. Brown can be used to put enemies into a temporary state of fear through barking, but otherwise he's not involved in combat. You could simply run past enemies, but there are some forced combat sections, especially in the back stretch of Rule of Rose, which are frustrating cases of padding. The enemies are disturbing, although there is little variety, but it's also not the main focus of the horror here. That lies elsewhere. I will note the excellent music during combat encounters. They're a lot more up-tempo and tense, very fitting for these situations. And then there are the boss fights. There are less than a handful, but they're the game's combat at its worst, especially the mermaid fight. They take much longer to go down than they really should. So far, I've been fairly harsh on Rule of Rose. With its substandard gameplay, Rule of Rose needs its narrative to carry its weight, and boy does it ever. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say so, but Silent Hill 2 is widely regarded as one of the peaks of narrative in a horror title or games in general, and Rule of Rose is right up there with it. It's a fairly simple story of a girl working through her trauma, with incredible execution. There are a number of elements that are left up to interpretation and have been debated about for years. The story is incredibly dark, but beautiful and genuinely moving. It tackles subjects you don't see often in games, but does so with grace. For some of these darker elements, without careful writing, come across as misery for the sake of misery. While there's plenty of misery in this story, it doesn't wallow in it. It's a testament to how well they executed on the narrative. So let's go through some of the areas that are a bit more set in stone from a chronological order, and secondly, look at other aspects that are more open to interpretation. So this gets into major spoilers, but it's hard to cover Rule of Rose without doing so. As a child, Jennifer goes on the airship with her parents for travel, but the airship crashes. Jennifer is the only surviving passenger of the crash. She is found by Greg, a pea farmer. Greg recently had his son Joshua pass away and is on the verge of taking his own life. Greg takes her in, dressing Jennifer up as Joshua and taking care of her, but locks her up. Wendy, a girl from a nearby orphanage, discovers Jen locked up as Josh. They exchange letters with one another, fall in love, and Wendy helps Jennifer escape from Greg's house, which sends him further down a spiral. Jennifer is welcomed at the orphanage. She grows closer with Wendy. One day, Jennifer finds Brown as a young pup and takes him in. Jennifer begins to spend more time with Brown, whom Wendy does not approve of. As leader of the Red Crayon Aristocrat Club, a club that the kids formed, Wendy gets the others of the club to bully Jennifer in a number of ways. This cultivates with the children killing Brown. In one of the most powerful, memorable scenes in the game full of them, Jennifer snaps and attacks Wendy, who leaves the orphanage as a result.
Your friend is in the bag. It's too late now. My friend! Give me back my friend! Liar! Go away! Just go away! I'll never forgive you! Not ever! And as for the rest of you, how could you believe all those lies? Aristocrats! You're just the opposite! I hate you! And I hate you! And you!
Jennifer is then asked by the others to lead the Red Crayon Aristocrat Club. Wendy leaves and goes to find Greg, dressing up as Josh. Further broken down by Wendy, Greg, now known as Stray Dog, returns under Wendy's command.
Once upon a time, there was a precious little girl.
He ends up killing all the children of the orphanage, including Wendy. In a moment of some form of clarity, he recognizes Jennifer and ends up taking his own life. A number of years later, Jennifer regains her memories of what happened, revisits them, and comes to terms with it. What we see for a vast majority of the game is Jennifer as an adult revisiting these memories. This helps make the scene in which she finally stands up to Wendy so powerful, and when the game cuts from Jennifer as an adult to her as a child. There's a fusing of the airship and the orphanage in her mind. As time goes on, you'll recognize the number of rooms from the airship that are from the orphanage. So that, at the surface level, is what Rule of Rose is all about. Again, some of these elements are more clear-cut, but some are more up for interpretation. So as great as this story is on the surface level, it starts to get really interesting and even more dark once we examine a number of plot elements that are up to interpretation and their implications. So let's go through these. There are hints that Joshua's father, Greg, may have kidnapped children and ate them. His house is known as the Gingerbread House by kids, as in the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel. There have been recent kidnappings of children in the area, although police have not found a connection to Greg. In the chapter where we're at Greg's house, he repeats a story about Stray Dog will have his peas. The peas may very well be children.
Stray Dog walks the streets each day, collecting peas as he walks to and fro. Big peas, small peas, every which kind of pea. Come Monday, he finds a pea. Come Tuesday, he bags the pea. Come Wednesday, he shows the pea to his son. Come Thursday, the pea kicks and screams. Come Friday, he grinds up the pea. Come Saturday, he buries the pea outside. The pea is in the ground. And by Sunday, it can't be found. Good night, young pea.
One of the other dark implications is the headmaster of the orphanage, Mr. Hoffman, and his relationship with some of the children of the orphanage, one of those being Clara. There's a room in the airship where Clara and Mr. Hoffman are present. If you try to open this drawer as Jennifer, this happens. And if you try to open it again, Jennifer will just say no.
No!
This is a unique instance that, as far as I know, doesn't happen anywhere else in the game. She doesn't want to know what's inside. Then there's the mermaid boss fight. There's the stitching on her stomach. She's constantly throwing up. In the last stretch of the game in the orphanage, Claire is cleaning one of the cots. This appears where a gynecologist exam would have been held. She's called away by Hoffman. If you look through the keyhole, we get this unsettling scene in the way it's shot and what Hoffman says.
Look, there's some dust over here. Give it a wipe.
Piecing it together, it seems like an abortion was involved. Then there is Diana, who is the favorite of the orphans for Mr. Hoffman. There's one scene between the two that's very unsettling with how he comforts her and her reaction.
Answer me, Diana! No new mummy or daddy will ever want you if you don't like that. No, I won't be angry. Just answer me. It was you, wasn't it? You were in charge after all.
Yuck! How disgusting. Ugh.
There's also the aspect of Hoffman leaving. It's a journal entry where he mentions that Clara will look after the others. He was not present when Greg came with Wendy to the orphanage. Why exactly did he leave? Well, Jennifer says the following. He tried too hard to be someone he wasn't. Those expectations were too much for him, and he wanted to escape those restrictions. Perhaps he became aware of what the children were up to, wanted to get away from what he was doing. Perhaps he was even a victim of them, another theory that's been proposed. And what happens to Clara is left open-ended. She disappears as well before Greg comes to the orphanage a stray dog under Wendy. Was she also a victim of the children? Did she take her own life? That's left unanswered. The Red Crown Aristocrat Club is where the cruelty of the children stems from in Rule of Rose. This was created by Wendy at some point before Jennifer joined the orphanage. It has its hierarchy and structure. Monthly gifts were to be made to them. There was relentless bullying and cruelty of the lower members, especially to Jennifer when she started to care more about Brown than Wendy wanted and was getting jealous. There are punishments for demotions, not providing a monthly gift, or breaking the rules, which we see many times throughout the game. Amanda, being one of the lower members along with Jennifer, suffers through a fair amount. While there seems to be a lot of commonalities with Lord of the Flies, the development team didn't say they looked to it for inspiration. It's where this cruelty that rises where most of the game's controversy stem from, even if the media and politicians exaggerated it greatly. Some of these moments include the stick with around the end or the onion bag. And of course, the killing of the animals, one of those being Brown in that bag. So Jennifer's had a pretty tough life. She was the only surviving passenger of the airship crash. Her parents died with it. She was found by Greg, who's on the verge of taking his own life, and dressed her up to be his deceased son. But when Wendy brought her to the orphanage, for a time she had a place and people cared for her, especially Wendy. Which makes it that much more tragic how Wendy, despite being kind to Jennifer, ended up being the most sadistic to her once Brown entered the picture. But even after all that, Jennifer still carries the brooch that Wendy gave to her. Throughout the game, while most of the others are indifferent or mean to Jennifer, Wendy is kind to us. And now, around a decade later as a young woman, she's coming to terms with her past and how she interprets it. It's a slow burn and takes a while for the pieces to fall together. And it doesn't help that the last stretch ramps up backtracking and forced combat sections. But that ending stretch of exploring the orphanage as a child Jennifer, she comes to terms with what happened, gives many insights of the orphanage and the others. Leaving behind Wendy, the others, and Brown, but not forgetting them and locking them in her memories, is one of the most moving, touching endings and moments I played in the game. Again, to compare it to Silent Hill 2, it's up there with Mary's Letter at the end. There's a simple piano piece that's melancholic that's so much to the section of wandering around here. If this end stretch doesn't make you feel anything, I think you need to check if you have a pulse, because you must have no heart. It's an incredible payoff to a story that's been building. A few games have made me feel as emotional as I did here at the end, which makes Rule of Rose such a fascinating yet frustrating title. Its wonderful narrative is surrounded by extremely clunky combat, boring navigation, and next to no puzzles to break things up. I can replay Silent Hill 2 every once in a while because of these strong puzzles and exploration. Here, as much as I enjoy the narrative that Rule of Rose presents, it's bogged down by mundane gameplay. It's absolutely worth experiencing if you're a horror fan or seeing a game pulling off its narrative wonderfully. So while I do recommend it to people, it's even a case where I just think watching a playthrough may be the better way to cut down some of these elements. It's a game that needs more recognition for what it was able to accomplish, and perhaps that will occur with a possible remaster, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. Thanks for watching.
Hats off to you. Hats off to you. Hats off to you.